Okay, so we are deviating a little bit from the plan. We're going to take a break from chapter 12, and we're going to do a pasuk in Mishlei that has to do indirectly or directly with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, with Tisha B'Av. The reason why I want to do this is, I guess, threefold. One is I'm at that point in the calendar where I can't not think about the Beis Hamikdash. So anything we can do to enhance our Tisha B'Av is good. Second thing is that I have done this pasuk before, and in the context of Tisha B'Av learning, but I haven't really taken it up, I don't think, as just a pasuk in Mishlei. So I wanted to do that. And then the third thing is I'm going to be teaching a new Mishlei course later on this coming year, and I'm on the lookout for good starter psukim. And I think this is a good one, but I'm not sure. So I kind of want to test it out and see how it goes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read the pasuk in the context of the Gemara, which has to do with Tisha B'Av, and then we're going to just forget the context of the Gemara and just do a regular Mishlei thing, but just have the Gemara in the back of our minds just in case it ends up helping. Okay, and then maybe at the end we'll come back and see how it applies. Okay, so the pasuk is Mishlei 28:14. Okay, and we'll start off the same way we usually do and just translate it, and then I'll show you the Gemara. So the pasuk says 28:14. Oh, so just methodologically speaking, I whatever. I know I've said this before, but I'll repeat it. Mishlei is divided into at least 3 sections. Chapters 1 through 9 are the introduction. Okay, chapters 10 through 24 is what I call the main part of Mishlei. And then chapters 25 through the end is the third part of Mishlei. And you could tell that these are 3 different sections because they each begin with Mishlei Shlomo. Okay, so the first 2 sections were written by Shlomo HaMelech, at least according to what the psukim say. But then the third section starts off Mishlei Shlomo Shehetiku Anshe Chizkiyahu. These are the proverbs of Shlomo that were written by the men of Chizkiyahu. So it's a different style and it's a different feel to it. They tend to be more proverbial proverbs, as opposed to a lot of the psukim we do feel like puzzles. These are much more straightforward. Okay, so that's where we are, 28:14 in the third section of Mishlei. Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid Umakshe Libo Yipol Bara'ah. Okay, who wants to translate? Yeah, Tamara, go ahead.
I guess praiseworthy / happy, right? That's
okay. Good. Yeah. So Tamara's getting this from. We've encountered this term in Tehillim a lot, and it is. I'm just going to comment on this for a second. So you'll see translations translated as praiseworthy. Okay, any example that I give that you've heard of can fit both translations. So, but then there's also happy, the name Asher. In the Shvatim comes from that. So our working understanding of it. Well, actually, I'm not going to say our working understanding, but just translation wise, you should know that it can mean praiseworthy or happy. Okay, or some combination of both of them. Okay, so Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid.
So is the person who is always afraid?
Yeah, who's always afraid. Okay. Umakshe libo yipol bara'ah.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly if maksha is a specific noun. I would have said hardness.
Yeah, hard. Yeah, so this is in the verb. So but one who hardens his heart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Will fall in badness.
Will fall in badness. Okay, that's a good general translation for now. Okay, yeah. Sorry, so that's the our translation. We may as well do the translation part, then we'll read the Gemara, then we'll go back. I'm sorry, I'm changing the plans here again. Mitzuras Sion says maksha is milashon kasha v'chazak. So maksha is hardness or strength. Okay, so let's say hardens or strengthens. Okay, his heart. All right. Sadigon says so in his translation he says or Kafach says bara'ah is ki'ilu, I think it's supposed to be ki'ilu nakud habez kamutza, as if the bet has a kamat under it. So he translates it as into the badness. Okay, he makes it a direct object, but we can kind of ignore that for now. Targum, I think, is pretty straightforward. Tuvohi debar nasha demadliach libe tedira uman demakshe libe nafel bebishta. Maybe there are nuances I'm not getting, but I think that's a pretty standard translation. And then the English translations I have say it in pretty much the same way. Praiseworthy is the man who always fears, but he who is stubborn of heart will fall into misfortune. Okay. So I'll add into, and I'll say badness or misfortune. Rav Hur says, fortunate is he who always fears, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into misfortune. Alter says, happy is the man who fears at all times, but who hardens his heart will fall into harm. Okay, so harm is also a good translation. Okay, so hold on to your thoughts for 1 second. Let me show you what this has to do with Tisha B'Av. Okay, I don't know if you, so there's the famous story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. I don't know how many of you have seen this inside. It's definitely worth doing. I should mention this now also. I don't know. Okay, usually on Tisha B'Av afternoon, and I'm in Seattle, so afternoon for me, early afternoon for you guys in the East Coast, late afternoon. I usually go and we have a learning group at Rabbi Weiss's house with a bunch of people, and turns out that Rabbi Weiss's whole family is not here, and the other people we learn with are also not here. So I don't know what I'm going to do yet. So I'm telling you now because it's possible that I'll just have Zoom learning in the afternoon for whoever wants to learn with me. But that's only if I can't secure live chavrusas. Okay, so stay tuned. If you or if you like, think that you might be open for some afternoon learning, then you can message me sometime during the week, and maybe I'll factor that in. Okay, anyway, so we've done this many times with Rabbi Moskowitz. This Gemara in Gitin Daf Nun He Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my dichsiv ashrei adam mafachi tamid u'makshe libo yipol b'ra'a. So what is the meaning of that which is written? Praiseworthy, happy is the person who is always afraid, but one who hardens or strengthens his heart will fall into badness. So it says, Akamsa ubar Kamsa charav Yerushalayim. Okay, Yerushalayim was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and this is talking about the second Beis Hamikdash era destruction of Yerushalayim. Okay, so they were destroyed because of Kamsa. Yerushalayim was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Atarnagola v'Tarnagolta charav Tur. Okay, and Tur Malka. The wait, I'm just gonna look at this in English here. The King's Mountain, the Tur Malka. The King's Mountain was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen, and then the Rispak, Ashka de Rispak Harov Beitar. Beitar was destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot. Okay, so obviously it's hard to understand what it means because it doesn't really answer the question, what does the proverb mean? But then the Gemara goes through and tells the whole stories, all the stories about each of these. And I'm just going to read the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa one just because it is an example of this pasuk in Mishlei. And again, we're going to read it and then we're going to set it aside and work on the pasuk like we usually do. But I just want to have it in our minds. Okay, so it says, the Gemara explains, Jerusalem, I'm just going to read the Steinsaltz English. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, go bring me my friend Kamsa. The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar Kamsa, that man is the enemy of that man. That is to say, you are my enemy. So he's speaking in euphemism. He's saying, you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Arise and leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I have already come, let me stay and I will give you the money for whatever I eat and drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you money for half the feast. Just do not send me away. So the guy's like trying to bargain, saying like, don't like evict me from the party, in front of everybody. But the host keeps insisting. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you money for the entire feast. So you offers to pay for the whole party. Just let me stay. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. Okay, so basically what happens is he goes and he informs against them to the king and says that the Jews are rebelling against you, and the king doesn't believe him. And then he says, oh yeah, send them a korban, and he secretly blemishes the korban, and the Jews are in this quandary, like, do we offer it or do we not? And this leads to a whole chain reaction, which ends up getting Yerushalayim destroyed. Okay, and that's what the Gemara goes on. Actually, I'll finish reading this part, I guess. Might as well do the full example. So he says, he went and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says this is the case? Bar Kamsa said to him, go and test them and send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government and see whether they will sacrifice it. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made a blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to us, halacha, it is a blemish. But according to them, the Gentile rules for offerings, it is not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priest would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished, but they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who did not consider it to be blemished. The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. So in other words, they were going to bring it as a sacrifice anyway, just to make peace with the government. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas said to them, if the priests do that, the people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. So he's worried it's going to set a precedent and people will think that this is okay according to halacha. The sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. The sages thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. So they're going to just, assassinate him. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, perhaps people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed. Okay, so this is Zechariah ben Avkulas, again, like worrying about people are going to draw halachic conclusions from this. As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Rabbi Yochanan says, the excessive anvanasuso shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas hechriva es beitenu, the sarfa es hechalenu, v'higlisenu miartzenu. The excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. Okay, so that is one of 3 examples of our pasuk that the Gemara says. Okay, so keep that in your mind, but then let's forget about it and analyze the pasuk like we usually do. Okay, so let's review once again. Ashrei Adam Mafake Tami Umaksha Libo Yipol Bara'a. Praiseworthy / happy is the person who is always afraid, but one who hardens or strengthens his heart will fall into, and then Ra'a means either badness, misfortune, or harm. Okay, what are the questions here? Yeah, Ariel?
It seems like a contradiction. In the first half, at least if we're gonna translate it as happy, and how am I happy if I'm always afraid?
Okay, right. Okay, that's the contradiction, right? So in other words, okay, so the first half seems to contain an internal contradiction. Okay, how can you be happy if you're constantly afraid, right? Constant fear does not sound like a happy state, emotional state. Okay.
Which naturally leads into all the definition questions.
Right. How can these be reconciled? Yeah. So let's just ask that definition question now. Actually, we'll ask it afterwards like this. So what does ashrei mean in this context? Okay. So again, let's just say the 3 things. Praiseworthy. Okay. If so, in what sense? Happy. Okay. If so, in what sense? Actually, I don't need to type that for everyone. Praiseworthy, happy, or some combination.
Oh.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And then, yeah. So, I'll let the other questions come naturally here. Yeah, Yosef?
Yeah, I mean, just again, definitional question, but what is Machshavah Lab and
yeah,
and why is that parallel to Mafached?
Okay,
right?
so what does hardening or strengthen one's heart mean in this context? And then how are the 2 halves opposites? Yeah. Michael?
What is the situation here?
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, I'm going to put that question first. What exactly is the scenario here? Is this about a specific scenario? Or is this a general principle? Now, if this is about a specific scenario, then we really have to explain, what does it mean tamid? What does it mean constantly? Does it mean constantly like within that scenario, or is there some other meaning of constantly here? And then if it is a general principle, then we have to understand how it applies to like all cases. Yeah, Isaiah or David?
Yeah, what does it even mean to harden your heart? Because the only heart hardening that I know is, we already asked that.
Oh,
The
yeah,
only
but
that
go
I
ahead.
know is Paro's, is
Right.
Hashem hardening Paro's heart.
Okay, so does this have anything to do with the hardening of Paro's heart? Okay, yeah.
Can I piggyback on Isaiah's hand?
Yeah.
No, already up there. Okay. When we talk about being afraid of what?
Okay, right. So afraid. Do we ask that yet? No, we did not. So let's
That's
ask.
the definition of it, but
Yeah. What does like I'm gonna say it in Hebrew, mafachid tamid, constant fear mean in this context? Was that just your question? What the definition is?
no, I'm asking you particularly, what are you afraid of?
Okay.
Other than just like
What
that,
are
what does
you
it mean?
afraid
That-
of?
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tamar?
What's the ra and what does it mean to fall into it?
Yeah. Okay. So what? Yeah. What is the ra? Okay. And what does it mean to fall into it? Actually, I'll put those as two separate questions. You see what I mean, by the way, about how I don't know. I mean, again, those of you who have been with us for a while, I think this feels like such a more straightforward pasuk. Not that the idea is accessible anymore, but it's not like a puzzle in the same sense. Like many of these other pasukim that we've done just seem to be like, I don't know, you can't even read it. Here we can read it. It's mostly just definition questions. Yeah, Ariel?
Yeah, did we ask what are the opposites of the pasuk?
We did ask, how are the two halves opposites?
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, Alex or Oren?
As a follow-up to the question about the what does it mean to harden your heart in this context?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. My question is it a state of being, or are you hardening it against a specific like quality or like?
Okay. Yeah. So is this action to be understood like as a this is not the clearest way to say it. I think this is what you're getting at, as an objectless stance, or are you hardening your heart against something? Is that what you're asking? Okay. All right. Yosef.
I think left of.
What was that?
I think it's a leftover hand.
Oh, okay,
don't
fine.
think I've-
All right. I lowered your hand and then I thought it went up again, but whatever. Okay. Isaiah or David?
Yeah. Are these absolutes? I mean, the first half definitely does sound to be an absolute of Mefachid is always afraid. But then is the Ashrei effect, is that always going to happen? And also with
Okay. So
equal
that's
odds?
that's a nice nuanced question. So actually, there's one question that we did not ask. Let's actually split this into two questions. What does mafachid mean in this context? What are you afraid of? And then let's say, what does tamid mean? Okay. How constant is constant? Like, is it from the moment you wake up? Like, is it when you're eating, when you're in the shower, when you lie down, when you rise up? And then the question is, how can I express this? Does the Ashrei correlate in actuality with the tamid? Okay, I'll explain what that means. In other words, is it that as long as you are afraid, then you can be described as Ashrei? Or does the constant fear produce some like subsequent outcome at a future point of Ashrei?
And also along with that, then taking Alex's question, and then for the second half, is that also going to be the case with the Yipol Be'a'a?
Okay, yeah. And I'll just add, when does this happen in relation to the hardening of the heart? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, is that
Maybe-
another question?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Someone is
is Ashrei
unmuted.
like what's that?
Someone is unmuted. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Is Ashrei like a commonly used word in Mishlei? Just a general question. 'Cause it's like a
Let's
unique-
find out. I know it's used in the introductory prakim because Ashrei Adam Matzah Chachma. Happy or praiseworthy is the person who's found Chachma. But I can't offhand think of other cases where it's used 7 times. Ashrei Adam Matzah Chachma v'Adam Yafik Tvuna v'ata banim shimu li v'ashrei drachai yishmoru. I think that's not Ashrei in the same way. Ashrei Adam Shomea Li. Okay, so it seems to be used in association. I think this is also using in terms of Chachma. This is Chachma talking, I believe. It says Ani Chachma Shachanti Arma. I am Chachma, I dwell in cunning. And then this is the Chachma monologue. I'm pretty sure, yeah. So it says Ashrei Adam Shomea Li. Happy is the person who has found me. And we have Baz l're'ehu chote u'machonin anavim ashrav. One who disparages his fellow is a sinner. One who is gracious to the humble or to the poor is happy. And then, yeah, okay, so it's used a couple times. I'm not seeing an obvious pattern. Yeah, Tamar?
Also a general question is just, so there were some questions about opposites. I was just wondering structurally, like, does this part of Mishlei always have opposites?
Yes, as far as I know. Yeah, and you the way I know that is it's usually usually more clear what the opposite is because they're cleaner halves. I was like, it's more obvious proverbs. Yeah. My dad. Yeah.
Is there no such thing as baseless fear?
Is there no such thing as baseless fear?
Isn't that what the first part of the first half of the pasuk is saying? You should always be afraid.
Right. So
wise to be fearless?
okay, yeah. So let me just think if I want to add that to here. I'm gonna make that into 2 questions. What are you afraid of? Or are you just afraid without an object? And if so, like,
Rational.
yeah, is that rational? Yeah. Yeah, let's keep it that. I think that's a good question. Yeah. Okay, good. Yosef?
Yeah, I mean, this, I don't know if you want to put this here, but how does this connect to Kamsa Bar Kamsa?
Okay, yeah, I'll put that here just so we don't forget. How
Yeah.
does this connect to Kamsa and Bar Kamsa?
Like, what's the parallel?
Yeah, how is that an example of this? Or an example or interpretation, explanation of this? Yeah, Ariel?
Yeah. Is there a difference between like Samech, Bechelko, and like this type of happiness?
So I'm not gonna ask that question. I think we'll just lump that under here. What does Ashrei mean? Because I don't want to like try to go through every other type of happiness and say, is it like that? Is it like that? Is it like that? You know, I mean, I think you can think about that, but I just don't want to like start bringing up particular other statements of Chazal about happiness.
Okay.
Yeah, Tamar.
I guess it sounds pretty general, but I still want to ask who's the audience.
Oh, yes, right. Okay, who is the audience? And the practical, I think, application is going to be answered by answering who the audience is and what's the scenario. But I think we do have to ask the question, practically speaking, how does one go about like doing this, right? Like, in other words, if I just say, be constantly afraid, it's not like a switch you can turn on, you know, I don't think. So yeah. Okay, that was a lot more questions than I expected. All right, so let me do what I usually do. So at this point in this year, for those who are not familiar, I'm going to copy and paste the questions into the Zoom chat so everyone can have them. And then we're going to take a minute to think. And then people who have explanations, we will call on first. And then after we do that, then we'll go through the Mefarshim. Okay. So, and if you have another question, then go ahead and interrupt. But let's take our thinking minute now and think. I want to add a question. I'll add it at the end. No, I'll add it onto Mafakhed here. Furthermore, is there a significance in the particular expression of mifached, okay, like as opposed to other words for fear, okay, like yira is one, harad is another one. So yeah.
Well, I think I have another question.
Yeah.
I'm just okay. I can't go through all the questions, but can you go back to the pasuk for a second? Yeah. So why is it's interesting that the first half of the pasuk isn't using like goodness, or as opposed to because using like happy instead of like goodness, versus like the second half of the pasuk is using like badness or misfortune. It seems like, how can I say it, like it's like a person who's afraid is happy versus like a person who's afraid good things will happen to him. You know what I mean?
Well, okay, yeah. So
it's not a clear parallel. It's almost
so this is part of what's difficult with the word ashrei. I think, okay, let me just check something here. I believe that in Tehillim 1:1, then the Radak explains ashrei in the plural. He explains why ashrei is plural. Yeah, he says milas ashrei hi le'olam b'lashon rabim. Ashrei is always in the plural. But Tom, and the reason is ki lo yi'ashru ha'adam b'tova achas shetimsa bo o b'hatzlacha achas shetizdamin lo. Because a person is not happy with one good thing that happens to him, or with one success that occurs to him. Ela b'tovos rabos sheimtzu bo yomru alav ashrav. Rather, with many goods that a person encounters, then they say about him ashrav. He is happy. So in other words, again, yeah, I struggle to find a good word in English that has this. I guess like fortunate is people use fortunate about one thing also. The fancy like Latin term of this kind of like happiness is like, I think like the totem bonum of like having like many, like the totality of all goods. So the point I'm trying to make though is that ashrei does mean that you're getting good stuff. So it is the opposite of like falling into bad stuff if you learn ra as like misfortune or harm.
Okay, I'm good. I was just
yeah. No, I'm glad you brought it up though. It clarified our question here. Okay, let's go and hear your ideas. Let's start with Michael.
So I kind of saw this as a like a Ezu Chacham Harot and Olad type of thing. So when it says you're always afraid, it doesn't necessarily mean like in a constant way where like the second you wake up you're afraid and then you're afraid till you fall asleep, but more in a way of anytime you're thinking about like a decision making, you're thinking about the future, but you let it affect you in an emotional way, and that's what the fear is that you actually really take it into account. And then the guy who's strengthening his heart is like, it's overconfidence. It's saying, no, it's not gonna happen to me, I'm too good for it. And then the ra he's gonna fall into is the ra he should have seen coming, but he strengthened his heart so he didn't.
Okay, good. All right, that's a very clean expression of the pshat, and in fact, I think Rashi says that on the Gemara. Let's just check. Rashi says that's on the other page. Rashi says mefached means doeg liros hanolad. Is he's worried in terms of seeing the consequences. Shelo te'era takala bakach im zos, meaning that he's worried like something bad shouldn't happen as a result if I do this action. Okay, so let me just summarize that here. Okay, I think that's good shot. So so constant fear is not talking about like literal talking about like I'm gonna just say, I know you didn't use these words, like a neurotic state of like perpetual terror. Okay, rather fear is being used in the sense of Ezehu Chacham Haroe Es Hanolad. Okay, who is wise? One who sees the consequences, okay, of his actions. Okay, and that is a quote from Maseches Tamid, I think it's 32a. it expresses it. Okay, so it means that a person who is constantly on the lookout for consequences that can happen from his bad decision making, or I guess bad things that can happen. Okay. Yeah, no, consequences. Wait, Michael, were you saying just bad things that can happen or as a result of his decisions? Rashi was saying as a result of his decisions.
I mean, I'd say it's a bit more general, but I guess if you want to get to the connection to the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story, I guess maybe it would work better with his decision specifically, but I think you can say it's more general.
Okay. Yeah, I also think that the pasuk lends itself to more general. Okay, so bad things. So I'll just say bad things that can happen. Things that can happen. So it's something. Let me say it's talking about a person. It's talking about a person who's constantly looking for bad things that can happen, and that knowledge is real to his emotions, to the point where he heeds the apprehension and like takes precautions. Okay. In contrast, the person who is overconfident that things will go his way is setting himself up for a misfortune because he will be blind to the consequences. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said like this might be a good starter pasuk for Mishlei. Like, arguably, this is the entirety of all of Sefer Mishlei. Okay, anyone want to add to this idea? I'm going to skim the what do you call the thingies for the party sign? Okay, yeah, Yosef.
Yeah, so I have something that's very similar but just slightly different in terms of the idea. I was thinking like if you're just in a general, I think this is the same idea, but I think if you're in a general state that like of how much is outside of your control, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be much more successful because you just know that A, you know how much, you know your limits, right?
Yeah.
And B, you know like and B, you know just risk, right? You can assess and understand risk. Right. I think that's what Bachei Tamid means, is that like fear is usually of something that like you can't control, right? In other words, if you really control it, then you wouldn't really be afraid of it. So yeah, saying that you're constantly aware of what's outside of your control, or you're going to be much more successful. Whereas the person who is Machshavah Lab, like same general understanding of what Machshavah Lab means, like that he denies like his own limits, right? Or like he like kind of, you know, like when you're in a situation where you're like very afraid of something, you can kind of be like, oh, I'm gonna man up from this. I'm just gonna take this on, right? Or like you have some major risk going on, you can kind of just like ignore it and be like, no, I'm okay.
Yeah, right? Power through.
Exactly, powering through, right? So it's saying like the guy who's just going to try to power through the like real risk that there is, that guy is going to yipol bara'a, and I think it's just saying like ra generally because it's very situation dependent, but it's generally good advice, right? It's just like it's a very general advice. It's saying it's just ra generally whatever the situation is, whether it has to do with his own shuv or whether it has to do with like his money or power, whatever it is. This is good advice, you know.
Okay. All right, good. So I see tomorrow's party symbol. I'm just going to add, type this up as well. So the way I'm hearing the difference, I agree that it's a similar idea with a nuanced difference. Michael sounded like he was saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that what this person is doing is in any given scenario, he's thinking like the Mafachei Tamid is in relation to particulars in terms of like, if I do this, well, I mean, again, maybe I'm influenced by Rashi. If I do this, what will happen? Or you know, what could happen that I'm not anticipating? Yosef is saying though that this refers to a general mentality of awareness of what is outside of your control. Okay, because if regarding things that are in your control, there's no need to be afraid, right? And the second half is talking about someone who is who basically like thinks he can like power through any factor that might be outside of his control and stand in his way. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's good. The ideas are going to get to a similar place. Before I call in tomorrow, I just want to read. I feel like I have to do this. Those who listen to the Stoic Jew podcast will have heard this a lot because this is probably the thing I quote the most. The foundation of Stoicism is expressed in Epictetus's Handbook, Chapter 1, which says, oops, hold on a second, 1:1. Sorry for the bad timing. Hold on. Enchiridion 1. There we go. Okay. So he says, so this is the foundation of Stoicism and the foundation of Mishlei. On the one hand, there are things that are in our power, whereas other things are not in our power. In our power are opinion, impulse, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is our own doing. A lot of those are still code words, but basically internal things. Things not in our power include our body, our possessions, our reputations, our status, and in a word, whatever is not our own doing. Now, things that are in our power are by nature free, unhindered, unimpeded. But things not in our power are weak, slavish, hindered, and belong to others. Now, here's the Mishleic point. Remember, therefore, that whenever you suppose those things that are by nature slavish to be free, or those things that belong to others to be your own, you will be hindered, miserable, and distressed, and you will find fault with both God and men. If, however, you suppose to be yours only what is yours, and what belongs to another to belong to another, as indeed it does, no one will ever compel you, no one will hinder you, you will find fault with no one, reproach no one, nor act against your own will. You will have no enemies, and no one will harm you, for no harm can touch you. Now, that promise is a little bit greater than what Shlomo is saying here, but the point, the practical point is the same, is that you need to constantly be aware of the two realms, what is in your control, what is not in your control, and in the realm of things that are not in your control, then let's put it this way, take enough measures about what is within your control to reduce the consequences that can happen to you of things that are outside of your control. I'm not saying that this is exactly the same as what Mishlei is saying. I'm saying that they're both on board in terms of the starting point. Okay, Tamar, what did you want to say?
I had 2 comments. So one of them, I think I was also thinking an idea that was pretty similar to Michael's, but I think that for me, Mifachet Tamid doesn't have to be the person is specifically sort of like, I don't want to say like looking for things to be afraid of, but like kind of, I feel like this is being set up that way. But I think that, and maybe this is like halfway between Michael and Yosef, I don't know, but like when you are looking at consequences and you could see for real that stuff can happen, that bad things can happen. Yeah. Then you're just open to being afraid. Like I think people are kind of naturally not open to being afraid, it's like naturally you feel like I have this and it's going to be okay, or other things like that. Certain things you feel like just can't happen, not for any reason, but because you just feel like they can't. I feel like the mafachet is the natural outcome of being aware of consequences. And then I have another thing after. All right, sure. So mafachet tamid is not a what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say contrived, but I will say it for now. I don't want to say artificial either. I'm going to say contrived state of like looking for bad things that can happen. Rather, it is a natural result of the awareness that bad things can happen. And most people don't have that awareness by default. Okay, yeah. What was your second point, Tamar? Connecting it to the kind of speculatively to the Gemara. It's not too detailed. Can I say something like that now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Just that I don't know what the other 2 stories are about. The Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and then there's like the rooster and the wagon shaft.
Yeah, I always forget. Every year that we try learning it, I don't think we ever get past Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know. This is really speculative because I don't know those stories, but it sounds like big cities or important things are falling for things that seem like that seem inconsequential. Right. So I guess that if you have a real Mishlei awareness of consequences, then that just because something doesn't seem like a big deal doesn't mean that it can't have consequences. Okay. All right. So let me comment on that for 1 second. That on the one hand, what you're saying is correct, that
even the smallest actions or inactions can have huge consequences to the point of like destroying cities, right? But let me just play devil's advocate here. So then, like, couldn't that lead to an actual neurotic state where like you're afraid that like, like maybe I shouldn't, I don't know, like touch the doorknob because maybe there's like a fatal disease that's going to kill me and my whole family and my whole town. Like, so how do you balance that, the reality that there are big consequences that come from little things, and like without going into like descending into full on like neurotic fear?
Yeah. So I think you can make a specific takeaway in this context, at least the way that I was learning Mefachet Tamid, is that a person who is not, who's thinking a little bit not objectively, might kind of say like certain things, like you just feel like it's not possible this is going to have a meaningful consequence, and therefore you don't you don't take it in, kind of. And I think that the Mefachet Tamid is going to know, like, look, you could think about probabilities, you could think about whatever, but you're aware that you can't foresee everything, and so you're aware that it's possible for such thing to have a consequence.
Okay, all right. So I saw the party sign on Yosef's thing. I'm just going to type this out here. So the question was, so then the second point was the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa shows that even seemingly inconsequential actions can have huge consequences, like destroying a city. Okay, then we said, should you really be concerned that like every small thing could be disastrous? So the answer is, so Tamar's answer was, if I understand it correctly, it's more about like the being open to the possibility that is the case, and not dismissing things like the Makshe Libo guy does, thinking that there's no way anything big and bad can come from such a small action. Is that a fair summary of what you were saying, or are you?
Yeah.
Okay, I have my own answer to that, but I want to call on Yosef first. Yosef, were you going to answer this?
Yeah,
go ahead.
You're saying the question of how do you not be neurotic?
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of think that the idea is not like to just be in a state where you're constantly looking for consequences. I mean, it to a degree it is saying that, but it's more just saying that, like, almost just be aware of just the natural order of things, and so that it would have some kind of consequence. Like, it's not saying that consequence should be the essence of how you operate, but it's saying it's more giving advice on how to generally operate in an intelligent way.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that is looking at the consequences, but it's not the whole thing, right? You can't take that as the essence. You are trying to operate in a smart way. And so as a separate thing, right, you have to take into account probability, right? And just like, and the reality of those consequences, right? And so therefore, based on that, you have to, you have to take into, like, there is one study in terms of being objective is the study of consequences, but then there is also a study of how to assess those consequences. And this is just discussing the study of consequences on its own, right?
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that consequences is only one element, and our pasuk is just just focusing on the midah of having that awareness, but there are other factors that should be taken into account when making like decisions. For example, I'm just going to give examples that we didn't mention, like, let's say like I don't know, like acting in line with good midos, or doing mitzvos, or following mishlei. Like, in other words, like, you have to take these into account based on probability, and on probability as one factor, plus all the other decision-making factors that are rational to take into account. So in other words, so to answer the question, you're saying that like, yeah, if the only factor you're looking into is trying to avoid negative consequences, then you're going to just be a mess of fear. But if you're thinking, okay, yeah, there's a possibility of these consequences here, but there's also another probability of these benefits, and like I have to act, and I'm going to act knowing that there's a possibility of consequences, but like I'm doing a rational action, or like I'm going to put on tefillin. Yeah, is there a chance that like maybe there's a splinter there, and when I put on the tefillin, then it's going to like puncture me, and then I'm going to get an infection, and it's going to go straight to my brain? You know, yeah, but like I'm not going to not put on tefillin for that reason. Yeah, my answer is kind of like that, only on the flip side, which is that that in terms of the Bar Kamsa story is it's always a possibility that you can inadvertently offend someone. Okay, we did a pasuk about that with the snare of the lips. I think that was in chapter 12. Okay, but in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, when we do K and BK, and story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, like publicly embarrassing someone is bound to have like major consequences. So like that is not a neurotic fear. Okay, in other words, I would say that like, you know, it's again, it's the same answer as Yosef, saying that like the goal is not to avoid anything that could possibly lead to a consequence. It's to avoid doing actions that on the whole, there is a probability of bad things happening, which is not worth doing the action for. I think that's like that's the point here. So I'll say answer 2.5 because I think it's part of the same answer. Okay. Are we ready to go into another idea? I have a feeling a lot of the ideas are going to be similar to this, but we'll see what happens. Okay, Isaiah, you're up, or David.
Yeah. So at first I thought this was a totally separate idea, but now I'm not so sure.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
And yeah. So I was thinking that Ashrei Adam Mifachei Tamid is maybe like happy is the person who like is aware of warning signs that either Hashem or reality is like sending him that what he's doing is not a good thing. So like if he's like paying attention to like how things are going for him and things are going wrong, then he's going to be able to see that maybe like he's doing something wrong, maybe because like he's making bad choices, or Hashem is like against what he's doing, and change his ways. But the person who like sees that things are going poorly for him and like strengthens himself against that and like doesn't respond to those like warning signs, he's going to end up like with worse consequences.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off, but I think there's a question I have which will develop it further. So this is talking about two different ways to respond to warning signs that you're on the wrong path. Okay, whether from let's say I'm going to be nitpicky and not say Hashem versus reality because everything in reality is from Hashem. So I'm going to say from Hashgacha Pratis or Hashgacha Klalis. Okay, so meaning that like personal divine providence, or Hashgacha Klalis is the laws of nature. Okay, so the first person responds with the fear of going against Hashem's will. Again, when I say Hashem's will, I don't just mean in terms of the halachic system. I mean like if you are getting a toothache, let's say, right, and the pain is not going away, and you just ignore it and say, oh, it'll go away, well, that's probably a bad idea because it could be an infection. And if it gets infected to a certain point, then like that could be very, very bad. So like that's Hashem's will also. How the body works is Hashem's will. So there should be a fear response that so the person responds with fear of going against Hashem's will and takes the proper steps to course correct. Okay, so that's like going to the dentist or whatever, right? The second person attempts to ignore or overpower or confidently like reassure himself that nothing bad will happen, and as a result he will suffer the consequence. So here, this is an interesting thing because I think the motive for not doing this is people don't like to feel fear. Fear is an unpleasant emotion, and so in order to like heed this advice, you have to allow yourself to be in a state where you are afraid that something bad is going to happen. In a sense, it's much easier to suppress the fear and deny that anything bad is going to happen and just push it out of your mind, as opposed to sitting in this state of fear and like facing this fact that something bad could happen. So like, the first person is like leaning into the fear and having the courage to sit with the fear, to make the decisions that need to be made. The second person is cowardly in the sense that he's doing everything he can to avoid the fear. Okay. That is what Shlomo Melech says in chapter 1 of Mishlei. I just want to read this because it's really poetic. When he's talking about the fools who ignore Chachma, he says, Admas Baruch, how long, you gullible fools, simpletons, will you love your naivete? And scoffers covet mockery for themselves, and fools hate knowledge. Tashuvu l'tochachti, return to my rebuke. Hine abilachem ruchi, I'm expressing my spirit to you. Odia dvarayschem, I'm making my words known to you. Yan, so this is Chachma talking. Yan karasi vatmeinu, but because I called out and you refused, natisi yadi ve'in makshiv, I extended my hand and no one listened. Vatifru kol atasi, you rejected all of my advice. V'tochachti lo avisem, and you did not desire my rebuke. Gam ani be'edechem eschak, I too will laugh at your misfortune. Elag b'vo fachtechem, I will mock you when the thing you fear arrives. B'vo chashoah pachtechem be'edechem kesufa ye'eseh, when your fear comes like a holocaust and your misfortune like a storm. When catastrophe and calamity befall you, then they will call me and I will not answer. They will look for me and not find me. Because they hated knowledge and they did not choose fear of Hashem. They did not desire my counsel. They rejected all my rebuke. They will eat the fruit of their ways, and they will be satisfied with their own advice. Ki meshuvas pasayim targim, the tranquility of the simpletons will kill them. V'shavas ksilim ta'abdeim, and the peace of the fools will destroy them. V'shemei li yishkam betach, but the one who listens to me will dwell securely. V'shanan mipachad ra'a, and will be sheltered from any fear of evil. So in other words, this guy in the second half who's hardening his heart doesn't want to be in a negative emotional state. So he pushes the fear away and just pretends everything is okay. And as a result, he ends up in an even worse negative state where it's even worse fear because the thing is actually happening to him. So it's just like delaying the inevitable. Now, I said to Isaiah I had a question on this. What was my question? It was a problem. Oh, the question was, where are you getting this from in the pasuk that it's preemptive?
Because I think that this is like a person who's Mifachei Tamid is someone who like is always like sensitive to the potential for things going against the course that he has chosen.
Okay. But where do you see this idea of responding to like the warning signs?
I mean, I think the person is acting out of fear. Like, I was thinking, like when I saw Pachad, I was thinking like fear of Hashem. And so this person's getting fear. Like, what is he doing from the fear. He's reacting to it in the way that I was reading.
Okay, let me just ask, did I imagine you using the term warning signs? Did I just come up with that, or did you use
No,
that?
I totally said the term warning sign.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah. No, because I like the approach, but I'm having a hard now. It sounds like you're saying more in the other side. Like, in other words, like this pasuk is definitely preemptive, right? You're having fear before the thing happens. But the difference between your idea and Michael, Tamar, and Yosef's idea is their ideas seem to apply even before anything is on the horizon. Your idea seems to apply once you start seeing something bad happening. And I like that as an approach, just because it is, it's easier to one of our questions was like, what, this guy's just in a state of fear, but you're saying that there is something concrete that he's responding to. And the only thing I like the idea, I'm just wondering where it is in the pasuk.
So I think maybe the pachad tamid is like a sensitivity to the fear. Like the fear arises from, things are going wrong. But like the person could ignore that, like you were saying, or he could be sensitive to it. Okay.
Okay, so you're saying, okay, so it's not directly alluded to in the pasuk, but the nature of the fear that we're talking about is something that is coming up of like, oh, did I do something wrong because I'm confronted with a stimulus that points me in that direction, or the sign that points me in that direction. Okay, I hear. All right, I like this idea. Okay, anyone want to add anything to Isaiah's idea before we go on? You can use your party sign. I'm looking, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so now we're up to Yosef. Yeah, we're up to Yosef. Oh, sorry. Wait just a second. We got Brooke.
Yeah.
I
was so sad. Because I didn't know if you saw it, so I kept flashing.
Oh yeah,
it,
no, I'm glad.
not.
Sorry, yeah.
I just want to add that it kind of reminds me of anxiety versus fear.
Yeah.
Of anxiety is you're always worrying about something and it makes you very aware of things.
Yeah.
Versus fear kind of only comes up when you're directly confronted with something. And this is kind of telling people to have a sort of mild amount of anxiety so that they're aware enough that they notice things, but not so much anxiety that they're always panicking.
Okay, I like that. I'm going to add that here. So, and this might even be its own idea. I'm not sure, or it might fit into both of them. So there's a difference between anxiety, which is without stimulus, and fear, which is in response to an external stimulus. And then the pasuk is telling you that it is advisable to have a low level of constant anxiety, simply because you'll be sensitive to picking up on things that you should actually fear. Whereas someone who hardens, I'm going to go ahead and develop this into a full idea, hardens his heart and wants to feel that total sense of everything being okay always, will miss out on that perk. I guess the example to give, and I guess my dad, for one, is in a position to acknowledge this, is like, I'm sure people who are at the operating table never have, or they shouldn't have, any time during the operation where they feel total calm. That would be disastrous. Having a heightened level of anxiety would also be disastrous, because you can't be up on, for that, you can't have that level of intensity for that long. But this low level anxiety of something could go wrong and I need to be aware, seems to be like the healthy point to be at. Yeah. If you want to chime in on with anything, then you could say that. But yeah.
You talking to me?
Yeah.
I mean, the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, but they should really read this pasuk in addition. It applies in so many things in medicine. And, I don't know if this is the proper setting for horror stories, but there, that's where horror stories come from. Is I'm confident I can handle this situation, and I have no fear. And then things can go. That's when things can go terribly wrong.
Okay, if you have a good horror story that would illustrate either the hardening of the heart in this sense, or where someone was able to catch something, but then because the person had this type of healthy fear, then they saved something.
It's going to be a personal story.
Okay.
Okay. I was a new resident in anesthesiology, and our anesthesia program did a somewhat unexplainable thing that the least experienced resident would go out and handle the most difficult situations sometimes.
Okay.
So if a person who was going into respiratory failure on the intensive care unit, they would send the lowest ranking resident to intubate that patient, to put a tube in so they can put them on a ventilator. And that's a situation that really, a lot of things could go wrong. So I'm on call one night, and I'm doing a case of a guy with multiple stab wounds, and big, heavy-set guy, not critically, not in critical condition, but he needed surgery. So we do the operation. He goes to the intensive care unit, and the next night they called the anesthesia department because the guy who had been on a ventilator had pulled out his endotracheal tube. Now, when he first came to the operating room, I was the resident who intubated him. So put him to sleep, put the tube in. I had no problem at all. So the guy needs to be reintubated. He's in the intensive care unit. His tube has come out. He still has respiratory compromise. Tube needs to go back in. So they call anesthesia. I'm the guy the least senior guy there, and I go to the intensive care unit to reintubate him. I intubated this guy before. I know that I can intubate him. I did it once already. And so I give him enough medication to just, put him into a state of being under anesthesia. And I take the equipment and I go to put the tube in, and I put the tube in the esophagus instead of in the trachea. I have a failed intubation. And it's interesting how fast a patient can go into a disastrous state when you do that. You're not delivering any oxygen to him. And it just seemed like it was not very long, maybe, less than a minute when he went into cardiac arrest. Fortunately, I realized that the tube was in the wrong place, took that tube out and put it in his trachea, and everything turned out fine. But the fact that I had intubated him before, and I was so confident that I could intubate him again, made me choose a way of going about that really subjected him to risk.
That's a good specific example of the type of mistake of just I did it once and the second time will be exactly the same, but in reality things are not exactly the same. So in you or in the world. So that's a good example of the overconfidence.
And just one other very brief example. When you're on call at night, before you go to bed, you always set up one operating room for the gunshot wound or the ruptured aneurysm for the most serious case that would come in overnight. You always have everything set up, all the different drugs and all the monitoring equipment. You always do that. You always have that ready. So you're ready for the really critically.
Okay, so I think that actually adds another answer to the question about how do you differentiate this type of fear from neuroses, and I think the answer is that neurosis is not practical. Okay, in other words, setting up an emergency, a room for operating room for an emergency, that is a practical precaution. Okay, but if I said we need to buy 100 extra hospital rooms to have in reserve in case 100 people get stabbed tonight, that's neuroses talking. Like that's beyond the practical. Washing your hands, before you eat. When you've been touching other stuff, that's a rational thing. Washing your hands constantly all day long, that's getting to their own neuroses. So I think that's another barometer for selecting whether you are implementing this pasuk or whether you're acting out your own psychological issues. Okay, Yosef, sorry to keep you waiting.
No big deal. So this might be more Joshy, but I actually think it is very practical.
Okay.
decision making. But I kind of like free associated like the word pachad to like pachad yitzchak a little bit.
Okay.
Thinking of it like from that pasuk. I don't know if this is exactly the idea of pachad yitzchak, but I think there's an idea that I think it's like Yitzchak feared Hashem, right? Hashem refers to himself to Yaakov as the pachad yitzchak, right? I think when we like that's the nevuah and Luz.
Right, Yaakov, I think swears by the pachad yitzchak, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh yeah, was that? Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was in Luz, right? It was by the rock when he was lying down the rock, whatever. But I was just thinking that maybe it's an idea of just like an idea like there's an idea that like an objective framework comes from like first and foremost an idea that there is a God, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe it's saying that you constantly need that like idea of like a higher being above you, and for that to be reality to you, which I think is like the fear, like why it's referring to as fear. And like if that is real to you, then you're going to be able to make objective decisions, right? And it's only with that like fundamental like idea of like a source of reality, right?
Yeah.
Then you're going to be able, if that is real to you, then you're going to be able to make good decisions, right? And that's why it's not just a denier of this idea or a guy. It's a guy who, it's even including a person who believes in it, but it's not like a reality, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's Machshavah Lab, because it's a guy who just like doesn't experience it or doesn't make it a reality to himself.
Right.
Or doesn't like internalize this idea in some way.
Yeah. Okay. Person who lacks that foundational awareness or hasn't internalized it. So I think my biggest question on this is Ikar Chaser Min HaSefer, that if it is talking about fear of Hashem, I feel like it'd be a really good time to say fear of Hashem. I think the idea you described is a great interpretation of Mishlei 1:7, which is Yiras Hashem Reishis Das Chachma Musar Vilim Bazu. Fear of Hashem is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise Chachma and Musar. That is talking about this foundational fear of Hashem. But I think that the fact that the pasuk doesn't mention Hashem, it's not excluding Hashem, but I think it like in other words, I'm okay saying, let's say like in Isaiah's idea of that this is talking about either personal divine providence or laws of nature, but you're differentiating it from fear of consequences in general, and saying specifically like this awareness of like the source of all existence. I think if it were saying that, then it would mention Hashem.
Yeah, I don't know Mishlei well enough like to say that or not.
It certainly is a good drush. Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, either way, I think it's a good drush based off this pasuk. I think the idea is real. I don't know if it applies to this, but I do think it's real. I think the idea, but I do think it could be saying that though, because it's like maybe it should say that here, but I think the point of it saying that it should be like pachad tamid, right? Not just that's a chiddush from even the pasuk before we were talking about, where I was saying that like Yiras Hashem is the what does it say exactly? It's the
Yiras Hashem Reishis Das is the beginning of knowledge.
Right, Reishis Das. But I'm just saying the fact that this needs to be tamid is its own idea of saying that it's not just it needs to be one of your like ikarim, so to say, of just like it's in a kind of just like in your philosophy, but it should be an experiential thing of saying that like this should affect you.
Okay,
right?
I like that. I like that. I definitely like the idea. Yeah, I definitely like the idea, even if I don't know if it's the pshat. So on experiential level, yeah, that's good. That's good. That's a good hook in the pasuk, at least with the tamid. Okay, Alex or Oren.
Yeah, this is mine. So I looked in the Koran.
Yeah.
Translation, and they have mifached as cautious.
I always used to translate this pasuk as a person who is always cautious or apprehensive.
Right.
The only reason I didn't like, go ahead and say your thing. I'll tell you why I didn't like that later, but yeah.
I kind of had this idea before I saw that, and then I saw that, and then it like reinforced my idea.
Yeah.
Which is something to do with somebody who is overly stubborn, who hardens their heart, will fall in. Well, bad things will happen to them because they're overly stubborn. They can't see, the various dangers that might befall them from just like sticking to their one narrow path.
Yeah.
Either like decision making or ideology or what have you. But somebody who is cautious about the potential ramifications of their actions, they won't have as many problems. And so the relevance to the Gemara is that this is about whichever rabbi that was that Rabbi Yochanan is not so happy with. Because that guy was stubborn and that guy was so stubborn in his in the way that he was so into like fulfilling the like technical observance of Korbanot, but wasn't willing to see the possible ramifications that did happen because of what he did.
Yeah. Okay. So this is talking about caution versus stubbornness, and the application to the Gemara is that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas was the Makshe Libo because he insisted on seeing things through the lens of his religious ideology, to the point where he wasn't thinking about actual consequences to the Jews and to and their like tenuous political position. Yeah. Okay, so I like that idea a lot. I think my only objection to the Quran's translation is I feel like by translating it as cautious, I think it's in English, the word cautious can be said without having the implication of feelings. And I think mafached definitely means that like you're feeling fear. So I feel like the word cautious is a little misleading, but practically speaking, I think you're right. And I think the Makshe Libo being ideology, I got to add the word ideology here. Oh, I said ideology. Yeah, I like that as an example of that. That's good. Hardening his mind, I think, is the, lev can mean mind or heart, right? So hardening your mind via an ideology, I think that's a good description of what an ideology is. You're imposing something on the reality. That's good. Okay. Anything to add to this by anybody? I will try to scroll through and see any party signs. No. Okay. Next is Isaiah or David.
Yeah. Different read. Just simply taking one small pivot from inside the self to outside the self.
Yeah.
And being mefached and then being also Makshe Libo to things that are happening to somebody else that's not going well. And that would just be simply, instead of when something bad is going on for me, and then either being open to that, being fearful, being cautious, anything like that, and then also being Machshavah Lab to that. On the other hand, just looking at other people, and if something is going bad for someone else, that will then consequentially affect me too. If I'm watching out for that, taking note, being concerned, either trying to figure ways to appease the person, not let things get worse for that person, especially if I know them and how to help things get better, then being cautious in doing that, not just like, oh, it's somebody else, it's their problem, it's whatever else, I don't have to care about it, it's on them.
Okay.
It'll end up affecting me too.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that's really good. And are you saying that because of the Gemara?
No, I mean,
okay, because that fits in really well with the Gemara, right? Because the Gemara says that the rabbis were silent, and then Bar Kamsa said, "Oh, if they're silent, then that means that they are agreeing with this." And then that's when he went and slandered them to the government,
So I'd say within how that Gemara played out, and then also even before things actually do get noticeably bad, to be on the lookout as well.
Yeah. All right. So if you see anything bad happening to someone else, or the possibility of that happening, don't shrug it off and say, not my problem, but rather use your Mishleic thinking to avert that consequence. Otherwise, it might end up affecting you, like in the story, like what happened to the rabbis in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story. Yeah. Okay. Yosef.
Yeah, I just want to go back to my idea earlier a little bit. I want to add one thing. I think it could also be like you can say that, I don't know if this is similar idea, but I think that that you can use this. I think that it's using extremes in this situation, right? Like Like, I think like the state of pachad is just like a complete, like being like completely overwhelmed by like a certain reality of God, and like and like the miksha eslibo is like a guy is like in complete like denial in a certain way, like he's actively pushing it away. I think it's like a spectrum, and you can use like, and you can see based on the way you make decisions where you at in terms of where you are at in terms of that like state, right? In other words, you can use it as like a diagnostic tool in terms of see like, well, I'm keep letting my emotions slip into my decision making. Like then I can see, oh, well, obviously like this idea is not such a reality to me in some way or whatever it is, right? You can use this diagnostic tool to see, well, okay, it must mean that I have a certain, I'm not letting this idea like permeate all of my thinking. Right?
All right, that's good. So I just added here, the pasuk is speaking about the two extremes of the spectrum. You can use it as a diagnostic tool to assess your reactions to see where you are on that spectrum. Okay, that's good. Okay, good. These are good ideas. I like see, this is, let me just say a little bit of methodology here. So, and I'm saying this for Rivki, okay? Because Rivki is always concerned that she's going to be saying an idea that is like, cliche Mishlei or stereotypically Mishlei. And I mentioned that if you ever are learning Mishlei and you feel yourself just drawn to an idea that sounds like a stereotypical Mishlei idea, there are two approaches you could take. One is to set it aside and force yourself to think about it in an out of the box way, and that will often yield good results. But the other way is you lean into it and develop it and bring it out, and maybe you'll find a nuance. Maybe it is a stereotypical Mishlei idea, but you'll find a nuance that you didn't appreciate. And I think a lot of these ideas that we're saying tonight could be characterized by people as stereotypical Mishlei ideas. Like if each of these ideas was only the only idea we got, we might think, oh, we didn't learn anything new tonight. But you see that there are shades of nuance in the different versions that we're seeing here, and I think that's a value. Okay, I want to show you at least two of the Mefarshim. Okay, the first one is someone who I don't usually go to, and I'll explain why. And the second one has to do with Tisha B'Av. Okay, so the first one is the Malbim, and I've given Shiurim and written articles on this. The Malbim is I love the Malbim's ideas, okay, but the reason why I typically don't go to him on Mishlei is because he's working with a premise that no one else has, which none of the other commentators have, which is that he says there's no such thing as synonyms in Hebrew, and every single nuance in the pasuk is like part of the main idea. Okay, so he gets great results from that. And he also has this whole linguistic theory that is his own theory of every shorish is different. And, so it's great results, but it's not a very user-friendly commentary for learning how to learn Mishlei, because if you only are exposed to Mishlei through the Malbim, you'll end up being paralyzed by saying, well, I have no way to interpret this pasuk because I don't get all the nuances in the pasuk, So, there's like the Malbim can do it, but I can't. So I tend to stay away from the Malbim, but here he brings out a nuance, which I think is very interesting. And his ideas, again, as I mentioned, are always good. So let's look at the Malbim. So here's what he says. First thing he says, and the Malbim has a two-part commentary. He has a Bir HaMilos where he explains the words, and the Bir HaInyan where he explains the idea. So in the Bir HaMilos, he says, Mefached et bebinyan hakaved, lo nimsa rak po u the Yeshayahu nun aleph yud gimel. So he says the word mefached is only used in this form. I don't know how to translate binyan hakaved in English. I don't know if there's a fancy grammatical term for that, but mifached with a mem is only found here and one other pasuk in Yeshayahu. And in Yeshayahu it says, "Vatishkach Hashem osecha note shamayim v'yosed aretz." You forgot Hashem, your Maker, the one who spreads out the heavens and founds the earth. Vatefached tamid, and you were mifached constantly. It's tifached because it's talking in second person. You were mifached constantly kol hayom, all day long. Mipnei chamas hametzik kasher konin lahashkis v'ayeh chamas hametzik. Okay, I gotta look this one up. For those keeping score at home, Yeshayahu is one of the most difficult Nevi'im to learn because his Hebrew is very flowery and poetic, and I often don't know how to translate it. He says, you were terrified continually. ArtScroll says you were terrified continually all day long because of the oppressor's fury when he prepares to destroy. But where's the oppressor's fury? Okay. So he says, Shirotza Lomar, and this is the key part, Sheb emes ein pachad, that in reality there is no fear, or there's nothing to fear. Okay. So what is he saying? Let's see his commentary now. That was just his explanation of the words. He says like this: Asher Adam mifached tamid. Yesh hevdel bein hapoched bebein hakal ubein hamifached. So there's a difference between the Hebrew construct of poched versus mifached. Both of them loosely could be translated as fear. Okay, but he says sheha mifached hu bedavar she'ein sham pachad. Mifached means when you are making yourself feel fear when there is nothing actually now to fear. Rak hu ose es atzmo mifached. He makes himself fearful. Okay, so he's learning it as praiseworthy or happy is the person who makes himself fearful. Okay. Vihine hapoched hu siman shu chote. So poched, if it used the word poched, that would be a sign that he sinned. Kumoshe nemar, as it says in Yeshayahu 33:14, pachadu b'tzion chataim. Fear in Zion, you sinners. Ukumoshe amr Chazal bebrachos chazye dahava mafached amrle chata'at. Okay, fine. There's another Chazal use it in the same way. Aval asher adam hamafached. But if it says, but here it says, praiseworthy is the person who makes himself fearful. Shehagam shalibo bari, that even though his heart is certain, ulam, or actually healthy or certain. No, healthy. Ulam lochata, maybe he did not sin. Osa es atma mafachid al ha'asid shlo yachata. He makes himself fearful about the future, lest he sin. And through this, then he'll guard himself from sin and he'll even out his ways. This is actually what my dad was talking about, right? So let's say you do an action, and you intubate the patient or whatever, and you did it correctly. You did not sin. So you could end up just kicking back and say, okay, I'm good. But the person in the pasuk says, no, I'm going to make myself fearful that maybe I will make a mistake in the future, and that will cause him to guard against his mistake. But someone who makes his heart hard, that is the opposite. He sees that he is being afflicted by afflictions, and there is fear, but he hardened his heart. He hardened his heart and he did not fear Hashem. He hardened his heart and there is no rising up from that. So that's like what Isaiah was saying. That okay, let me just summarize the Malbim here in writing. Okay, so the Malbim is saying, okay, he's saying mifached means one who makes himself fearful, even though there is nothing at present to fear. Okay, so the person in the first half, even though he knows that he didn't sin, will be afraid that he might sin. And that fear, he'll will make himself fearful that he might sin in the future, and in so doing, will prevent that sin from happening. Okay, the guy in the second half sees warning signs that he has sinned, but hardens his heart against those signs, thereby making himself more likely to stumble in the future. Okay, so it's a kind of a combination. The second half is like what Isaiah was saying. The first half, though, is more like what Brooke was saying, which is having this low level of anxiety when there's no present cause for fear, because he knows that he might make a mistake, and then that will keep him from making the mistake. Okay, so that's the Malbim's nuanced interpretation. Okay, last one I want to look at is the Rambam, who is one of the classic commentators who, in this case, actually ties it to the Mikdash. Funny thing, though, is he ties it to the first base of Mikdash. Okay, in addition, he says like this. Rambam says, Ashrei Adam mafached tamin, lemi sheroy lefached mimeno. So he is afraid of the one who it is fit to be afraid of. This will cause him to become to make himself wise by taking advice, hahoganas, by taking good advice, to avoid the harm that he is afraid of. Oh, this is an interesting thing. But someone who makes his heart hard, Visam lakel hadavarim, and he puts his trust in God, he relies on God for things, which he should be afraid of, hu yipol bara'a, he will fall into evil. Okay, so he's talking about a misplaced sense of bitachon, of trust in God. Okay, and he gives an example. Halotira ki haksha'as halev hechriva beis hamikdash harishon v'hasheni. He says, you see that the stubbornness of the heart caused the first and the second base mikdash to be destroyed. V'zesh imlo hayat tzidkia makshe libo v'hayamesim tzavaro tachas ol melech Bavel lo galina me'artenu. He says, you see that if Tzidkiyahu, who was the last king of Yehuda, if he had not hardened his heart and he had placed his neck under the yoke of the king of Bavel, we would not have been exiled from our land at that time. Okay, so I started to research this because I needed to brush up on my facts here. And I read the two references in Malachim Beis and in Divrei Yamim. Okay, and here's what it says. Tzidkiah was 21 years old. This is in Malachim Beis 24:18 through 25:7. Tzidkiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 11 years in Yerushalayim. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Yirmiyah, son of Livna. That's not the prophet Yirmiyahu. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, like everything Yehoiakim had done. It was because of the wrath of Hashem upon Yerushalayim and Yehuda until he would cast them away from his presence that Tzidkiah rebelled against the king of Bavel. Okay, that's the sin. Then it tells the story. It happened in the 9th year. Actually, it doesn't tell the story. Okay, it tells about the siege, but then we'll read about his fate. It says, they seized the king and brought him up to the king of Bavel at Rivla, and they spoke words of judgment to him. They slaughtered Tzidkiah's sons before his eyes. Nebuchadnezzar blinded Tzidkiah's eyes, and then he bound him in leg irons and brought him to Bavel. So that's a pretty good falling into bad. Okay, but so it doesn't really comment on what his mistake was. But then in Divrei Hayamim, which is the recap, it says Tzidkiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 11 years in Yerushalayim. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, his God, and he did not humble himself before Yirmiyahu Hanavi, who spoke for Hashem. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear allegiance by God. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against repenting to Hashem, God of Israel. So it actually uses the phrase Vayakesh as orpo. He stiffened his neck, and Vayamet as lavavo, and strengthen his heart from doing a teshuvah to Hashem. So I was like, that must be where the Rambam gets it from. But then I was like, it still doesn't really give us that much information. And then I realized Yirmiyahu chapters 37 and 38 detail what his sins were, and there's a bunch of Gemaras on it. I was like, I don't have time for this right now. So maybe if you want to understand Tzidkiyahu's hardening of his heart, then you could look into those prakim, those Gemaras. But the point is that according to the Rambam, at this time, he should have yielded to the king of Bavel, and then we would have been allowed to stay in our land. But instead of that, then he rebelled, and we were exiled, and he was blinded, and his sons were killed. And then the Rambam goes on, and he says, if anyone doesn't do research on this, by the way, then feel free to post it in the Mishlei after party chat. Okay. And I got to do my book commercial. So I'm a big fan, not dropping my phone. I'm a big fan of the Magid series of Tanakh. And there are many different books by many different authors. And I just bought this Yirmiyahu one, which got here before Shabbos. Very good book if you want just like the basic shot in Yirmiyahu, because what he does, apparently Sefer Yirmiyahu, I did not realize the extent to which this is the case. Sefer Yirmiyahu, the chapters are written completely out of chronological order, and he basically walks you through the book in chronological order in light of the words of Chazal and modern archaeology, but he does it in a very shot-oriented way to just bring out the basic ideas, not like, you don't feel like you're reading some sort of very creative personal theory. So it's very, very good book. And he has a chapter on Tzidkiyahu, which I also want to read, but I didn't get a chance to do it before Shiur. Okay. Rambam then goes on, and he mentions also, so too in the second base Mikdash, lo hayu nichnaim lamalchus acheres. They did not subordinate themselves to another malchus, another government, nosnim tavaram tachas ulam, and then and place their necks under the yoke of their government. So it's funny, he does not bring in Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. But I don't know if he's referencing Chazal's or history or his own Shita. but yeah, it is interesting that he says he blames the both the destruction of both Beis Mikdash on it, and I think that as we go into Tisha B'Av, you see that our Gemara in Gitin, which again we're not going to analyze here, says that there were 3 examples of this. The destruction of Yerushalayim, the destruction of Tur Malka, and the destruction of Beitar. But what would be interesting to do is just be on the lookout as you read through the Kinos and as you read through the history and as you read through Eicha. I don't know how much is going to mean Eicha, as read through Yirmiyahu. What manifestations of this pasuk in Mishlei do you find? And like, where was there this type of stubbornness? Where was this type of like seeing warning signs and not responding with the proper thing? And I think it would be interesting to look at the events through that lens, because that's what Chazal are proposing here. Okay, any comments before we actually let's do this. Let's do a recap, and then if there are any comments or questions or other ideas, then we'll do that, and then if not, we'll end for today. So, a lot of ideas to review here. Okay, so we have Michael's idea, which is the marquee of Mishlei, which is Ezehu Chacham Aros Anolad, that you should be aware of things that of consequences of your actions and be on guard against them, and take the appropriate precautions. But if you stubbornly refuse to do that, thinking that everything's going to go your way, then you're going to suffer those consequences. And we added some nuances here from Yosef, saying that this is just more about a general awareness that there are things outside of your control, versus this thing that I can just, if I meet something that's not in my control, I can just power through it and I'll be okay. And then Tamar pointing out about how this is also not about like looking for specific things. It's about a general awareness of things going out of your control. And then you'll have this, or like organically, there will be this sense of healthy caution. And then we asked, what is the difference between this and neuroses? And we said, well, one thing is, first of all, this is just saying you should be open to the fact that there could be consequences that don't go your way. And you should be open to the consequence that big disasters can come from small consequences. And this doesn't mean that you should like go out of your way to try to prevent all small consequences, but it means that you should factor in the fact that there are consequences like this. Plus, it means you should think mishleically and like, don't do things like upset, embarrass someone publicly like the host did to Bar Kamsa. So these are all ideas about the general Mishleic state of being cautious about consequences. Okay, that's one cluster of ideas. Then we had Isaiah's idea, which is how you relate to warning signs that you're on the wrong track, whether warning signs from God, like sending the Nevi'im, and or whether it's in the laws of nature, like getting a toothache, or like, the canary in the coal mine dies, or any of these other things, or like, starting to notice like, things going wrong in, in the economy. I mean, there are many examples of this. I'm not going to go into examples. Okay, so we said the idea here is, in order, the step that this pasuk is trying to get you to do is to feel fear, okay? And people don't like feeling fear, but you should be willing to feel the fear, because that's what's going to propel you to take steps to undo the bad thing or to avert the disaster. But the guy who hardens his heart wants to just pretend everything is okay. Like, that's the person who does not go into the doctor because what if it's cancer, Yeah, well, if it's true that if you pretend that there's nothing wrong, you'll avoid right now the fear that it might be cancer. But if it actually is cancer and you wait too long, then you're going to have an even worse time, because then the consequences will be upon you and there might not be anything you can do. So you have to face the fear in order to actually take the precautions to try to like undo it. And that's that. So the pasuk is really about the willingness to confront that fear in order to avert the consequences versus the unwillingness to confront the fear, and by just pretending everything's going to be okay. And then Brooke said the idea here is that there is a difference between anxiety, which is without a stimulus, which if you take it to extreme, then that is neurotic, versus a fear where you're responding to an actual stimulus. But as Brooke said, it is healthy to have a low level of anxiety, because that will put you on the alert to the fact that things can go wrong. Whereas if you just pretend everything's hunky-dory, then you might just miss these warning signs, or be overconfident and walk into a bad decision like my dad described. Yosef's idea, perhaps a drush, which was about when it says constant, the only fear that's constant is fear of Hashem. And that's like the underlying premise that is underlying all of Mishlei and all of Torah and all the other stuff, having an awareness that there's a source of reality that you have to yield to that determines everything. And that, if you are not internalizing that, then to the extent that you don't internalize it, you're going to get consequences. And the pasuk is stating these two extremes because you can then use this as a barometer for seeing where you are. Like, how often am I aware of Hashem? Am I at this level of Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Sami, that Hashem is constantly on my mind? Like the Rambam describes the end of the Mor Nevuchim, or like the Ramah describes at the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, of like, being in the palace with the king, or am I just going about my business and only thinking about Hashem, like, when it suits me? Oren's idea was about a specific type of hardening your heart, which is hardening your mind through imposing your ideology or your way of viewing things onto reality in a way that makes you not cautious to practical consequences. David had the application of in addition to applying this for yourself, you should apply this for other people. When you see things going wrong for other people, then that could be the case as well. That you need to step up and like care for them, because that could affect you. You shouldn't, we're all part of a system. You shouldn't think that, if this person falls, then that's not my problem. Everything could affect everybody. I'll tell you without going into, I'm not knowledgeable about climate stuff, but I'll tell you, I was thinking about the fact that let's say like right now in Seattle, it is a pleasant 62 degrees. Okay. It's a little on the cool side. It's been in the low 70s in the day, or sometimes high 70s, and at night it gets down to the high 50s. And I was thinking, what would my view of the world be if I didn't have any access to the news? I would think that the whole world is like this, and it's only because we're aware of these tremendous heat waves that are everywhere, that like I am now aware that there are other places that don't have this. And it's very, I was thinking about that. I was thinking how easy it is to just treat your own circumstances that you're enjoying and experiencing as the circumstances for everybody. And even though I have access to the news, it's easy for me to just feel like, oh, summer was great weather, and not think about like all the other, bad, weather phenomena that are going on everywhere else. So that's an example of David's idea. And then the Malbim's idea is that it's talking, Mefache means to make yourself fearful, even if you're not experiencing fear now. And you do that to avoid the consequences, whereas Machshavah Lab is like Isaiah's idea of seeing the warning signs and then ignoring them. And then the Ralbag's idea had to do with taking advice to guard against someone who you should guard against versus trusting in God that everything's going to be okay. I didn't actually elaborate on that. He didn't say it, but people in Yirmiyahu's time basically said, like, God will never destroy the Jewish people. God will never destroy, he won't destroy the Jewish people. He'll never destroy the Beis Hamikdash, and people just felt that. And that's why no one believed Yirmiyahu. And, like today, right? I'm sure there are many people who feel that like, there's no way we can lose Israel, and God would never let that happen. And they just trust that God will make everything be okay. And he's saying that type of thinking, by shifting rational decision-making responsibility from us to God, that is going to lead to bad decisions and a certain type of idea. It is a type of Oren's, what Oren talked about is the ideological stubbornness, it's just couching itself in religiosity. So that's another disaster. Okay, that ended up being very good ideas. And the homework assignment, so to speak, is to think about this during Tisha B'Av and think about applications of this on a national or personal level, and see if you can think of any new ideas that emerge from this perspective, like Chazal said. Okay, any other questions or points or examples that you want to share? If not, we can call it quits for tonight. And I'll just say again, in case people weren't here, be on the lookout in my WhatsApp groups. There's a chance that I will host an open group learning on Tisha B'Av afternoon. New York time, it would probably be around 3-ish until the end of the Tainus. But I don't know, because it depends on if I can get live chavrusas. Yeah, so just, it's going to be a game time decision. So if you have any requests though, or if you could tell me that you'd be interested, that might sway me to like opt for that person, that decision. So we'll see. Okay. Also, no, I'm not going to open this up. I don't think. Okay, whatever. You know, because I also give a shiur in my shul, but it's not worked in the past to try to open that up to other people. So, oh, that's the other possibility. Maybe I'll give over that shiur in the afternoon. We'll see what happens. Okay, whatever. But just let me know if you're interested. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. And have a great Tisha B'Av. And by great, I mean, it's a whole thing. Like people have all their things about like what to say for Tisha B'Av, like have an easy fast and have, I still am a big fan of saying have a productive fast. Because it does drive home the message that there is a mission to the tainus. Like you should be spending the day doing tshuva, or like in this case doing avelus and saying kinos, and it should yield results. So and that includes having an easy fast. If difficult fast make it hard for you to be productive, but if the pain is productive, then you should have a lot of pain on your fast day. So whatever's going to be good and productive for you.
All right, thank you.
Later. Oh, also, sorry, one important announcement. There's a slight chance that I'm gonna have to cancel next week because I'm gonna be out of town, and it's gonna depend on whether I can get Wi-Fi. Okay, so I'll stay tuned for that as well. All right, take care.